Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Caregiving Gen X Style. I'm Steve Mullen.
And I'm Jennifer Mullen.
One of the more disturbing things about a loved one with dementia is they sometimes forget how to do things they've known how to do for a while. We received a listener question about this phenomena, and in this episode, we'll talk with a guest about it. But first, Jennifer, how's your mom?
My mom is doing well.
Good.
I feel like a broken record.
Big time.
Yeah, I know, but in only the best way.
Absolutely.
She's doing great. She actually had my brother took her today to have some stitches removed from her arm. Reminder, she had a little melanoma on her arm that had to be removed. And man, I'll tell you, I can't remember if I talked about it in the last episode we recorded, but holy cow, she had a pretty, I think, how many stitches did she say?
I had not seen it, but she said total of 20.
Yeah.
4 of them were internal.
Yeah, I mean, that was
it was a good zipper.
It was a pretty good zipper. But anyway, she had those removed today. It sounds like all went well with that. So that was good. And we just wrapped up a lovely Mother's Day celebration. Yes. It was wonderful. My brother and his husband and Gagi, and of course the kids are home. And my brother always makes Mother's Day very special. He makes a delightful brunch for all of us. It was wonderful. That we all get to enjoy. And the weather was gorgeous. So it was really nice just to sit.
What was the thing he added this year? What was it called?
Dutch Babies.
Dutch Baby. I wanted to say Apple Brown Betty, but I knew that wasn't right.
Dutch Babies, kind of like funnel cake with like fruit on it and then whipped cream. I mean, you can't go wrong. And made in the cast iron skillets.
Yeah, I had a helping with the apples, which I like apples. And then I said, should I put whipped cream on this? And Jennifer turned around and covered the entire thing with whipped cream.
Because why would you not put whipped cream on it?
It was a bit much. You overdid it.
Whatevs. I don't think you cannot overdo whipped cream. But anyway, it was delightful. And I think Mom very much enjoyed herself. The weather was absolutely gorgeous.
It was glorious.
We got to sit out on the deck all afternoon and listen to music and chat. And it was lovely. So
it was great.
All is well on the Gagi front.
Good.
So Steve, how's your mom?
She's doing fine. As of the time we're recording this, we are a little more than a week away from her move into her new ALF.
Hashtag teapots.
Yes, the teapot moving, packing up is probably going to happen this weekend. As of the time that this is going to be published, it'll only be a couple of days. But our family moved around a lot when I was a kid. You know, my dad wasn't in the military, but he worked for IBM, which I don't know how much you know about IBM, but it's pretty much the same darn thing. They will move you around a lot.
Well, right. It stands for I've been moved.
I've been moved, yes. So she's moved a lot. She's dealt with a lot of moves. And by the way, we mentioned in the last episode, we are paying for, or she is paying for packing and moving. And actually what I realized after we signed the contract or, finalized the contract is that it's not only packing and moving, it's packing, moving, and unpacking. They're going to unpack for us.
Amazing. But
despite that, she feels like she has to pack up her apartment. And what that really means, by the way, is that I and I alone have to pack up her apartment. Every time I go over there, she's got a long list of things that I have to go through. Today, it was her closet in her kitchen that has all of her damned wreaths.
Yes, there are a lot of wreaths. I was explaining to one of our friends recently about how much she likes wreaths. And I said, and she has them on every door. And our friend was like, what do you mean every door? And I'm like, like the front door when you walk in the apartment. And then when you close that door, it's on the back of the door. And then like the door that goes to the closet and the door to the closet.
It's insane. So
it's
she
everywhere.
had in her house when she lived independently, she had a rack that I think was custom built. I don't know who the heck built this thing, but it had about 20 wreaths on it. And we pared that down to 4, thinking, okay, every season she gets a wreath. She has replenished her wreaths. I mean, she's got, I don't know, 10, 12 now.
I think we have some of them stored here in our attic.
There's some Christmas. We have our Christmas stuff, and that gets stored in our attic, and there's at least 1 or 2 in there. But it is nuts. So the thing today was basically what's on the top shelf of the kitchen closet, which is mostly wreaths. It's driving me up the wall. And I've said to her, I think at least a dozen times, Mom, you are paying for packing and moving. Let them pack you and move you. Well, what are they going to do with that box down there? It's not closed. They'll figure it out. They're professionals.
I mean, it's driving me up the wall. In fairness, a couple things. Number one, she has a lot of time on her hands.
Yes, she does.
And she knows that she's about to move. So I kind of get it. She is just thinking like, well, what can I kind of do in the meantime? Right?
Yeah. Today, for instance, I had to go up in this closet and deal with all the reads, and she just kept saying, well, we need to organize this. We need to organize this. We need to organize this. And we did. And she said, well, isn't that better then? Everything's in a box up there. I said, yeah, they were going to do that for you. But, and today, really, it was just, if it makes her feel better, do it.
It's filling time. It's given her brain something to think on, work on. I mean, I suppose it's not the worst thing in the world.
She's now living in an apartment that has boxes here, there, and everywhere.
Well,
and I was hoping to avoid that.
Of course, yes.
And she's not moving, as of the time that we're recording this, for a week and 2 days.
Yeah.
So she's going to be living in an apartment with boxes laying around all over the place for a week and 2 days. One other little quick thing. I'm sorry, but this was kind of funny. So, middle of the night last night, she had a little issue. We'll just leave it at that. Her sheets got soiled. So she mentioned it when I got there. She said, oh, the sheets are off the bed because they had to wash them. I said, okay. She said, yeah, here's the problem. I only have one set of sheets left. I said, why? You had 3. She said, yeah, my friend, and I won't mention the name, my friend in the ALF, I had promised her those sheets because she's not going to have a queen size bed anymore. She's going to have a full size bed. So she promised these sheets to her friend. She gave 2 sets of sheets to her friend.
Oh my goodness.
And therefore only has 1 set of sheets left. And she thought, heck? Surely they'll be fine.
But it's not like she's not had this issue before. What was she thinking?
I know.
I appreciate her generosity and all.
I said, can you get them back? I can go up there now. She's, no, they're washing them. I said, well, I hope they get finished washing them before you go to bed tonight, which is a bit of a problem there. Anyway, all right, we're going to move on from all of that. So, as we mentioned in the intro, the idea for this episode came from a listener question. We received a voicemail from Leslie, who had the following to say.
Hey, Jennifer and Steve. I'm really enjoying your podcast. I'm on year 3 of my caregiving journey. My mom's in rehab facility for the second time in 2 months. And I wanted to make a comment about technology. I've noticed with my mom that she becomes less and less able to use her iPhone. And when her mentation improves, she often has low sodium episodes. She can't use her iPhone, but if it improves, I can tell because she's using her iPhone again. So she texts her family on Easter, hallelujah, I love my family, happy Easter. And she answers a phone call the other morning. It's an interesting barometer of her cognitive skills, even more so than the clock. Has anyone else found that to be true? I'm excited to learn more. Bye for now.
So, first off, Leslie, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. And thanks so much for sending us this voicemail. It's a really, really interesting question. I chatted with Leslie via text for a little bit after she sent this, and she said her mother has mild cognitive impairment, but seems to be kind of leaning toward dementia a little bit. Her memory issues, as she said in her voicemail, show up more when her sodium levels are off, which is really interesting. I'd never heard of that.
So at the root of this, basically, is loved ones forgetting how to do stuff they previously knew how to do. So Steve did see this a little bit. You saw it a bit with Nana when she was going through her several months of COVID delirium, which I know we've touched on that in some previous episodes. When she was absolutely at the worst of it, she started having trouble telling time and even struggled a little bit with reading. And it was definitely very disturbing when that was happening, when you're watching that happen, because you kind of don't know what's happening.
Right.
Kind of freaks you out a little bit.
We decided to reach out to a previous guest to talk more about it and ask how we can handle it as caregivers. So I spoke to Dr. Mitch Clionsky, who you may remember from our episode, I believe it was last fall, on dealing with dementia, which, by the way, has been our most popular episode ever. He's such a great guest. So I recorded this interview separately due to scheduling.
Steve kicked me out.
I
kicked
did
me
not.
off the podcast.
No, it was due to scheduling. And here it is. We now welcome to the show Dr. Mitch Clionsky, a board-certified neuropsychologist who has conducted literally tens of thousands of dementia evaluations and has also authored books on the subject along with his wife. Dr. Clionsky, welcome back to Caregiving Gen X Style.
Glad to be back, Steve. Always a pleasure.
So I provided you with a transcript of the listener question that started us talking on this subject for this episode, and we talked about it a little bit before I hit record. And I guess the first question is, how common is it for people with memory issues to suddenly forget how to do things that they knew how to do days before or even the day before?
I hear this kind of question from the families of my patients because they're looking for answers about how to predict what someone's going to do. Oftentimes, people who forget something that they used to know how to do later on remember again how to do it. And this blows their mind because, how's this happening? What's going on? What are the circuits that cause this to happen? I'll be brutally honest and tell you, a lot of times we really don't know. So, as with any phenomenon that you're trying to understand, it's good to have people try to keep track of what's going on, much the same as if they have a reaction that's an emotional reaction to something. They wonder, why am I feeling this way? We start to look for the antecedents. Well, in the case of emotional activities, a lot of times you can figure it out pretty easily after a while based on the situation and the activity the person's involved in. When you're dealing with dementia, you're dealing with a moving target. And people are not the same day to day or even at the same time of the day. So, for example, you could have somebody who seems to be doing pretty well with a new routine and then forget about how to do it. And then later on it comes back to them. And you can't really know what's going on. And you just sort of have to be aware of the fact that it might not work that time. And it usually doesn't mean the person is deteriorating rapidly. It usually means they had a bad night's sleep. Maybe they're in a new environment when they're trying to do it. Maybe there's just one factor that has changed, but that's enough of a difference that that old pattern is now disrupted. Maybe it's the time of day. We talk in the world of dementia, particularly in later stages, about this thing called sundowning, where as the day goes on, the person becomes more confused and at times more agitated. They may hallucinate. They may become more belligerent. Part of this we expect is due to maybe fatigue effect over the course of the day, or they took a nap and they woke up for it, but they're not fully awake. Sometimes it's just due to the fact that as the day goes on, their fatigue impairs their breathing ability. So they're actually, at that point, becoming a little hypoxic, a little less able to breathe, because they're just not, aging does a lot to us, as you well know.
Sure.
So sometimes there's a pattern that's a daily kind of pattern. Sometimes it depends on how many people are around. Is the person overwhelmed? Is it in a way that they haven't quite done it quite that way before, and so to them it seems new? Other times it's just that their blood pressure is under better control now for some reason. They haven't maybe had as much salt in their diet, so their blood pressure is better controlled and their thinking is a little better. If they're diabetic, it could be that the sugar levels are more well controlled. It could be that you look for things like urinary tract infection that can cause someone, especially if it's much different behavior than they had just a little while ago. So I got to give you a lot of answers to the fact that
Sure.
The simple answer is, we've seen that. We just don't always know what causes it.
Well, it sounds like it's a good reason to understand that you need to know as much as you possibly can about your loved one's health issues. So things like blood pressure, things like diabetes, these things that could potentially cause it. And so maybe you could kind of predict them a little bit.
Exactly. And also if it's situational and you say, this usually happens right around the holidays, or this usually happens around the weekend when maybe we don't have as much care, or the person doesn't go to their day activities program, or the people they normally interact with, like someone who comes into the house to care for them, it switches out to a replacement. And when that happens, it just changes enough of the consistency of their life that they're now not able to do something they used to be able to do.
Right. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. So, but let's assume for a moment this isn't something that's happened before, that your loved one just forgets, say, how to work a smartphone or tell time or things like that. But it's the first time it's ever happened and it comes out of nowhere. Is that a sign you should get them to see a doctor or a specialist?
I think it depends a lot on whether there are other confusion-related symptoms. It may simply be the first of the times during the course of their memory decline that they've had this particular problem. Things don't always go in a consistent way. If you look back, you could say, oh yeah, there was that episode then. Then there was another one a week or two later. Then they started happening a little more often, and now they can't do it at all. And so in retrospect, you piece it together. But when you're involved in that particular period, you don't have that kind of 30,000-foot view of what's going on. So it's just a phenomenon. Now, if, on the other hand, they're generally confused, then you start looking for what are the medical causes. Then you want a urinalysis. Mm-hmm. Then you want to look at their blood pressure. Then you want to look at their sugar levels. You want to make sure they haven't somehow developed a flu or some other infectious process. Because as you well know, as you get older, any kind of virus, any kind of influenza is going to affect you much more than it did when you were younger. You just don't have the reserves to fight it off.
As caregivers, how should we handle the situation? I mean, obviously, I hear what you're saying. So maybe it's not a giant reason for concern. It's just a progression. But I mean, obviously, it can kind of freak us out. So if it's not something that happens intermittently, like it does with our listener's mother, it can be a bit of a surprise, particularly when it's something as basic as reading a clock or something. How should we handle it when we're dealing with them one-on-one?
I think whenever you're dealing with dementia, you have to be thinking that this is a progressive, deteriorating disease. When we treat dementia, we are pushing back against the tide. And consequently, we're going to eventually lose ground. Even in the best treatment plans, the best medication interventions, the best behavioral supports, the best people, you're simply going to eventually lose some ground. And that's part of what you need to expect just because of the nature of the illness. There's no getting around that, unfortunately. What you're really hoping for is that you make each of the present days as meaningful and as connected as you possibly can, and just take it a day at a time. I know that sounds trite, but it really is the only way to approach this is let's see what we can do today to make this the best day.
And I guess, are you suggesting, if it's something like, I can't read that clock anymore or whatever, you just deflect and move on?
Well, there's a lot of strategies for dealing with things. The one book that I always tell my dementia caregivers to read is out of Johns Hopkins called The 36-Hour Day. And it, the title reflects how caregivers for dementia relatives often feel like there just aren't enough hours in the day. What I like about this book, which has been out for about 40 years, it's now in its 7th edition, they keep updating it, is it is written for dealing with problems. So here's how you communicate how to do this. Here's how you deflect so that you don't butt heads with this person you love. Here's how to appreciate the fact that this person is not the same person who raised you, and therefore your role has changed. Being the son or the daughter now means that you're probably going to be the father or the mother.
Yeah, absolutely.
At some points. And that's hard for all of us. I've never known anyone who can really deal with that fully. It's just against our nature, but it's true. And eventually we have to balance it in terms of, okay, just as being parents of our own children, when do I allow them to make their own decisions, or when do I intervene? Where's the safety here?
Right. And I guess with things like with the example of the smartphone, eventually you may have to switch over to a simpler flip phone, or even just a regular corded phone, like a cordless phone, like everybody has had in their house for a long time, but most of us are getting rid of. So I guess it's just a matter of adapting.
And I think that it's a great idea to have a corded phone with push buttons the way that person did it throughout his or her life. I mean, I'm old enough to go back to rotary dials.
Oh, me too.
Are you?
Absolutely.
And, there's something very gratifying about turning the dial and having it go the whole way back, made the transition to push buttons. But for most people who are not traveling, don't need the smartphone features, unless they're really into texting. And most of the people we're talking about are not going to be texting. They're going to be making phone calls or receiving phone calls. So you would go back to an older technology is a great approach. That person's going to feel more comfortable with it.
Yeah, I think that may be the way to go if they're starting to lose that ability. Now, I have one final unrelated question. It's something that we were talking about a few episodes ago when we were talking to a gentleman who was our guest was an Alzheimer's caregiver, and we started talking about the dementia testing a little bit. And one of the parts of that standard test is the patient is asked to draw a clock. Why? Why is the clock such a good gauge of mental capacity?
I love clocks. I really do, because they involve so many different functions. Clocks are really interesting. So we always have people draw 2 clocks. One of them is a freehand clock. And I say to them, just please draw a clock face, put in all the numbers, and we watch them organize it. We see if the numbers are in the right order. We see if they're spaced properly. We see if the face they've drawn is too small, so their planning abilities are bad. We'll see if they put in the numbers in a counterclockwise order. So there's a number of ways that particular part is important. Then we'll ask them to show a specific time. And usually we want a time that has the hands pointing to 2 different halves of the clock face. And usually one that can be both literal or abstract. So for example, I often use 10 after 11 because there is a 10 already on the clock. But it's not the 10 that you're looking for them to use to show 10 after. So we're looking, can they remember to use hands? We don't tell them to use hands. We just ask them to show a time. Then we want to see if they put them in the right place. We want to see if they're making the hour hand shorter than the minute hand or incorrectly longer. But then some people think they're being cute. They just draw them both the same size because they can't remember. Mm-hmm. So you're getting at memory, you're getting at planning, you're getting at abstract thinking. And the other clock we have them draw is we give them the circle. So now it's larger than typically they would draw themselves. Not always, but generally larger. And there's a different planning component here because now they have to make their numbers fit the clock face we've put rather than simply being able to sort of right-size it for how they draw the numbers. But it's one of those things that if you only have a minute or two to try to get an idea of someone's planning, organization, and memory functions, it's a dandy little test. But it doesn't tell you enough to make a diagnosis. So that's the thing that I want to caution people about. And what's really interesting is sometimes the mistake someone makes on one clock, they don't make on the other clock. Sometimes they make a completely different mistake on the other clock. And so if you're using it as a reflection, it's going to say, oh, I know what this person's problem is. It's all about planning. You see how their numbers aren't spaced properly. You say, yes. And then the next clock they draw is beautiful. You say, well, maybe not so much.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the story that our guest from a few episodes told was his mother went in for the testing and, she came out and he said, well, how did it go? She said, if it weren't for that darn clock, I wouldn't have Alzheimer's. And I mean, she was being funny, but I mean, it's funny and kind of sad at the same time.
It is. As with many things like that happen in Alzheimer's, there are moments that are so bittersweet.
Right.
You just have to, you can laugh and you can cry.
Right. Sometimes you have to. And that's what Jennifer and I say all the time. So if we weren't laughing at this stuff, we'd just start bawling. But It was interesting. My mother, we mentioned in the last episode, my mother is getting ready to move into a new assisted living because the previous situation became untenable, which I talked about at length in that last episode. But they did do a dementia test with her to ensure that she wasn't more appropriate for memory care, which, by the way, I'm going to go ahead and say she aced it. But they actually didn't do the clock. There was 2 5-sided figures that were kind of overlapping in the middle to create another one.
Yeah,
and they just asked her to just draw exactly what that was.
So that's not very sensitive. It's actually one component of a very old test that was first developed back in the 1970s called the Folstein. Marshall Folstein was the guy who put this together, a mini mental state exam. And it is responsible for 1 out of the 30 points that you can get on that test. So it'll tell you if the person's having spatial problems and a little bit some organization problems, but it's sort of like, what's a good example? Sort of like deciding that the weather in a particular city is good or bad by visiting one day.
Right. Well, and there was more to the test than that. That wasn't the only thing, of course.
Okay.
It was, I think that portion of the test, there were 5 or 6 questions and a variety of different things, spell this word backwards.
Okay, but that's what they gave her was the mini mental state exam.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear it was better than initially thought. All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Dr. Clionsky, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. Tell us again, where can people find information about you and your books? Well,
our best direction is to go to our website, which is called braindoc.com, BRAINDOC. And if you go to the website and you go to the About Us tab at the top of the website, you'll get down to a whole variety of different podcasts, stories about us, some interviews. The other thing that's really I like to tell people about is in this website, we also have a dementia prevention checklist that it's free. You can do it online or you can download it and fill it out. But I really think everyone should take inventory and say, okay, what are my risks? Because as we talked about in your other episode, 1 in 2 cases of dementia are preventable. And you want to know what you can do to be in that 1 rather than the 2.
Absolutely.
So that's why we have that.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for being with us.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Thanks again to Dr. Clionsky for talking with us, and check the show notes for this episode for a link to his website. Jennifer, you really just kind of now listened to this. What'd you think?
Yeah, I had a lot of thoughts about what he was sharing today, and actually going back to something that Leslie mentioned in her voicemail related to her mother's sodium levels. We heard Dr. Clionsky talk about that, like paying attention and like really closely paying attention to all the other physiological things that are going on in the body that can contribute to the dementia. I know it sounds weird because dementia in and of itself is a physiological thing that's happening in the body, but I found it really interesting.
It's affected by so many other things that are going on in the body.
Medications, sodium levels, like Leslie mentions.
Infections.
That was really interesting to me to hear him talk about that. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting, again, I suppose if I really thought about it, it would have come to me, and it makes sense, but the patterns and the time of day when certain things are happening. And if I guess that's why you hear all the time, right? Like it's very important to keep to a schedule. Yep. And our previous guest, Christoph,
yes,
when he was talking about taking care of his mom, I feel certain he mentioned that somewhere along the way, just having to keep to the schedule and how critical that was. And
you frequently ding me for being a little rigid about schedules, and I swear that happened when my mother was going through her bout of COVID delirium, because if I strayed from the schedule, she was lost.
Then,
yes, then, and I realize now she's not, because she's fine now, but I just kind of stuck to that.
Yeah,
That's
but
how
as we've talked about in other episodes, though, the times where you can step back a little bit and give yourself a break, you got to give yourself a break.
Anyway,
the clock was really interesting too. Listening to him talk about that, definitely fascinating, and I think we talked about it obviously when we interviewed Dr. Clionsky the first time, but just the reminder again that we don't look at analog clocks very much anymore. So it is still really interesting to me.
Is, that's the clock to them.
I guess, but my mom had to do that. And I'm sorry, I might have mentioned it on that episode, but she had to do that test recently, a month or 2 months ago. And she struggled a little bit in the beginning when they said, and I do think, by the way, that she was asked to do 10 minutes after 11. So I totally get like they're trying to trip you up there a little bit, but I get it. But also I was thinking, I don't remember the last time my mother looked at an analog clock.
Yeah.
Like even my brain would have to stop and think about it for a minute.
So fun fact, my mother today went to the neurologist for just a follow-up. She needs to go, once every 9 months or so just for a follow-up. Really, it's just to make sure she can continue to get her memory drug, the Aricept. And they had her draw a clock.
Yeah.
And she did it in the hospital. I've mentioned this before. She did it in the hospital and I wasn't watching. And that was when she was at her close to her worst. But today I watched like an eagle. And it was impressive how, and it's funny, I was watching this and I was hearing Dr. Clionsky in my head about the organization and the planning and everything else. And you know what, by the way, you know what time they asked her to draw?
10 minutes after 11. Yeah.
But her organization was really impressive. She drew the 12 at the top, the 6 at the bottom, the 3 on the side, the 9 on the other side, and then filled in the numbers around it. And then put the hands of the clock, and they were the right length and everything. I was really impressed.
Yeah.
Really, really impressed. They did give her the 3 words to remember.
Yes.
She got 2 out of 3. She forgot the other one. She lost the other one. She was really kicking herself about it.
Yeah, your mom sometimes loses a word even on a good day, though.
Oh, absolutely.
And has for years. So, there's that, too.
So there was one other piece of advice that Dr. Clionsky gave me before I hit record in the interview that I wanted to make sure we mentioned. He said if your loved one's going through what we're talking about in this episode, it's a good idea to keep a journal. And that could help you figure out a pattern, whether it's, every day at 4 o'clock, maybe this drug is wearing off or this, that, or the other. They're a little hungry. They haven't had a snack, whatever it is. It could help you possibly hunt down the cause. And I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, I think we've talked about keeping a journal for sort of a couple of different things. Certainly almost like keeping a journal of the medications, or that's,
Yes.
I guess, really a list of the medications. But yeah, I think... Yeah, because when you're in it, sometimes it is then hard to go back and think back to something that happened last week or even yesterday. And so probably I'm a visual person too. Like then I can remember that stuff in my head if I need to recall it.
It's she got this confused last Thursday. Why was that? Well, if you wrote it down, what was going on at that time, you might be able to figure it out.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's the end of this episode. We do have an announcement. If you've been listening since last year around this time, you'll recall we backed off on our scheduling during the summer months, and that's so we can kind of pay attention to the other sides of our sandwich. We're doing that again this year. It really allowed us to spend more time with our family. We didn't have to worry about when's the next episode getting recorded. So from June until August, we will publish 1 episode per month. That means our next episode from this one will come out in the middle of June.
Maybe some bloopers.
I could possibly put together some bloopers to go in between those,
bloopers,
maybe. Maybe
you know
some,
how much I love it.
I have a lot stored away. I just have to put them together.
Because we screw up a lot?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes. I also wanted to give a shout out to a listener who took the time to send me an email. Send us an email. Sorry, it's not just me.
Wow,
ABC
man,
all eyes on me.
I got kicked out of the interview with Dr. Clionsky this time around, and now, she's only sending you an email.
Well,
Fine.
I was the one that was answering it anyway.
Oh my goodness.
She said she wants to be referred to as a pseudonym, Angie, which means from now on I must call her quote unquote Angie.
Oh my God, the quotes again.
She sent us a great email. It was chocked full of information and ideas. She's actually a long distance caregiver across country lines. She's in the U.S. Her parents are in Canada, I believe, or it could be the other way around.
If there are passports involved.
I mean, seriously. So we'll be looking through it. We'll see if we can turn possibly something into an episode there. But regardless, thanks for listening, quote unquote, Angie.
Angie. I'm just going to say Angie. You don't have to have quote unquote.
Well, I'm going to be saying
Angie.
quote unquote Angie. Okay. But if you would like to send us a note, an email, some tips, some thoughts, how's your mom, how's your dad, how's your uncle, whatever the heck you want to send us, there's a bunch of ways to do it. Email us, caregivinggenxstyle@gmail.com. You can send us a text or a voicemail, like Leslie did, at 804-723-1221. You can also find us on Twitter. Our handle is at Gen X Caregiving, and we're also on Facebook. You can search for the name of the podcast, but you're better off going into the show notes and just clicking on the link. That way you'll absolutely get to the right page. So, that's our episode. Thanks for listening. We hope to hear from you soon. Have a great day.
Good night, everyone.